Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. It's time for Ukraine and the Ukrainian counter-offensive. Zelensky has been trotting all around Europe. A lot of people said because he's scared of an assassination attempt coming in from Russia. Other people said that he's going around to get weapons for his spring counter-offensive. Now, I say spring, and we're in the middle of it. So I wonder if the name needs to be changed. But in any case, let's learn a little more about the counteroffensive with Miss Maria Beat, who's back once again on Dev Talks. Thank you so much for joining us. Your shows are very well liked by the audience, and people really look forward for your opinion. What's happening in Ukraine?
Well, the same stuff, I would say. Uh, Many things raise question marks. And of course, this much spoken about coming offensive is still coming. We've been talking about it for several months by now, and to no avail. And you mentioned very correctly that Zelensky has recently toured Europe, basically trying to raise enthusiasm for Ukrainian situation. I won't say offensive because offensive was planned to happen at first in winter, then in spring, now in summer. So nobody knows when it will happen. But sooner or later it will happen. And some analysts expect it to start in June because for Zelensky nowadays, the most important thing is to get additional arms and finance from the so called United West. And in order to do that, he has to produce something. And the most valuable product is a successful Ukrainian offensive. But nobody knows how offensive it would be because Russians are making big preparations. So it's quite possible that Ukrainian assault will be unsuccessful. But at least in the very beginning, some successes on the battlefield could be hypothetically expected. So that's why, considering that in middle of July there would be the NATO summit in Vilnius in Lithuania, it would be the best time for starting the offensive in mid-June, because by the time of the summit, Ukrainian army would be still advancing, and he could produce some promising results for the summit in order to get additional armaments and money for Ukraine. So that's the most reasonable prediction when the offensive would start. You know that there were also a lot of talk that maybe it won't be the Ukrainians, it would be Russians who would be the first to strike. And again, they were saying that, oh, now we're waiting for winter to come. We want the soil to freeze and to become solid. Then they were saying, oh, this winter was surprisingly warm. Now it's spring. It's not the right time. Let the soil dry a little bit. But now it's May. I think everything has dried. Everything is blooming and blossoming in Ukraine, but still the offensive has not started. Like 10, maybe 7 days ago, some kind of rumors appeared on Russian internet when some military correspondents from the battlefield started saying, oh, the Ukrainians started advancing. And
Hmm.
then it was reported as a hearsay that no advances were really happening. The only thing that keeps happening is the battle for Bakhmut, or as the Russians call it, Artomovsk. And that's the battle going on for several months by now. It's really surprising because it's a small town. It strategically it doesn't make too much sense. Is it's of no big importance at all. And this battle is fought not by the Russian regular army in general, but by the Wagner PMC, which is another strange development because Wagner is the most result generating military formation as of now, accounting for the best part of Russian military success. So, if the offensive is to start, some people say that Ukrainians would hit Bakhmut because Wagner is still trying to take over Bakhmut completely. Others say that it would be most probably in the south, that Ukrainians would try to get through to Crimea in order to separate Crimea from the better part of Russian territories. Others say that it would be somewhere close to Kherson and Zaporozhye. So predictions are quite vague, but everybody expects the offensive.
Predictions indeed are quite vague. As a matter of fact, Washington Post reported that Zelensky wanted to attack Russia towards Belgorod.
Yeah.
That scared me because something like that happens, Ukraine is done. I mean, that's it. It's going to be closed. The story will be over.
Well, the thing is that Belgorod and the adjacent regions, it's pure Russian territory. It's been Russia since times immemorial, and there is no question about that part, that regions being the Russian territory. But it so happens that I think anti-missile defense was quite poor, and from the very beginning, Ukrainians started shelling those regions, and occasionally they would even try to raid the villages on the border of the Kharkiv region and Belgorod region. So that's the most vulnerable part of the Russian pre-border territories. I mean, those bordering on Ukraine. So, well, we have to be very open. No physical border ever existed between these two regions. People were living like a single community for centuries.
Yeah,
So it's very easy for Ukrainians, if they want to advance into the Belgorod region.
that is true. Now, I want to ask you. Of course, the Russian revert to that sort of an attack will be absolutely devastating for Ukraine. There's a very interesting thing which is coming out, and when I do my research, one of the things that I kind of can't understand, why isn't Russia blown up all the bridges on the Dnieper? If the Russian objective is to take the eastern part of Ukraine, which is clear up the Donbass, Kharkiv in the north, and the Zaporozhye even a region in the evening in the south and stuff like that. Why haven't they blown up the bridges? Because those bridges are the ones that are getting all the Ukrainian equipment on the east. And if the bridges go, that's it. The entire region falls into your hand. Whatever little resistance will be there will have to surrender because there's no way to get uh, 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 supplies from across the river. Some people say the Russians want to use it themselves. Some people say they don't want to expand it to that point where civilians start getting hurt. What do you think is happening? Why hasn't he done this little thing? And this, by the way, is a criticism coming out from Russian channels. So
Absolutely right. It's a good question to ask because nobody could render a meaningful answer. That was a big question mark from the very beginning, and there were all kinds of speculations by uh, mass media, by political analysts, both in Russia and in Europe, in different countries. And some people in Russia in a decision-making position, they at first they were saying, "Oh, the certain rules that we obey for combat operations. We don't want to damage too much the civil infrastructure and bridges, in particular railroad bridges. It's a important element of the transportation infrastructure in Ukraine. Others were saying that, well, we don't want to do that because after the war is over, too much restoration would be required. So all this reasoning are not very well grounded, and still no clear-cut answer was given. And there is one interesting element: if they ruined the bridges at the very beginning of the operation, no NATO munition, no tanks, no howitzers, or whatever would have been delivered to Ukraine, because railroads would have stopped functioning. But it's never been done. So supplies continue going, foreign dignitaries continue coming to Kiev by railroad without any concern. So some people say that apparently there is some kind of under the table agreement that Russians would not touch the railroads, won't ruin the infrastructure. But okay, it sounds like there is an agreement, but what's the reason? Why? And for what purpose? So many things are still murky, and one of them is this so called bridges issue.
It's this is something I've not been able to understand, because this is a anyways, a lot of people say today that the Russians might want to use these bridges themselves. That's why they're not doing much, because they say that we might have to use this ourselves. So why kind of create trouble there? My question would move forward with regards to Ukraine as a country. Today, we saw what happened in the Kremlin, and firstly, what is the Russian reaction? How people? I don't want to know the political reaction. How have the people responded? I mean, you know the language, and you probably keep a very keen hawk eye into what people are saying there. How have the people responded to this attack on the Kremlin, and what are the Russian people asking for from its leadership? Are they telling them now is the time to attack? Are they telling him to steamroll through Ukraine? Are they telling him to kind of stop the war and negotiate? What are the Russian people saying?
Well, of course, people are most unhappy with this drone attack. Drones were interfering into the Russian territory for quite a while but now. But when they reach the Kremlin to be stopped, it's something really too much. And of course, the Russian leadership kept saying, oh, if they cross the red lines, we will really strike them hard. They will remember us. And still, nothing happens. And people are quite unhappy. There are all kinds of speculations. Some people say that if they wanted the leaders, they would have attacked. Apparently, they don't want to hit back Ukrainians too much. But there are some hotheads, even at the Russian Duma, who say we should bomb Kiev immediately. And in particular, after the Kremlin attack, we should have bombed Zelensky's headquarters. We know where he sits. We know where his bunker is located. We should hit him hard. But again, nothing happened. So the drone attack, it was more for political reason. Of course, it's a kind of indicator that the Russian air defense, even around Moscow, is not that good, because otherwise these drones would have been shot kilometers, hundreds of kilometers prior to reaching Moscow. But they were intercepted right at the door of the Kremlin. the residence of Russian presidents. So this is another thing that makes many people unhappy, and many people saying that Russian army is mismanaged, that Russian air defense is mismanaged, that something's wrong with army command. It creates a kind of I would say political disturbances among the Kremlin elite, which is not a good thing during the time of war because the country has to be united. And this is what the government appeals to. But appeals without visible success, they don't work too much. And this is what's been happening, and it's quite sad.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I always used to sit and think that here is a country trying to literally destroy itself. I mean, literally commit suicide. And one would wonder that what's wrong with them. Why aren't they realizing it? And that the war is not in their favor. Ukraine is a smaller country, Russia is a larger power, and this and that. But when this kind of things happen now, as far as air defense is concerned, these are mechanics. They fail sometimes. Air defense is not 100% foolproof, so that's fine. I can accept something coming in, and it's a small little drone. It flew in, and fair enough. Having said that, they're at war. They have to respond in kind. Where somewhere I find that the Russians have, they're restrained to a certain extent. Putin says, no, 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 don't do that, don't do that. Let's not cross a certain line. So the Russians have maintained that respect of an adversary in terms of not crossing certain red lines, but Ukraine hasn't, and that's something which it is. Russia's that great a nation. No country is that good, including my own. No country is that good when it comes to war. At the end of it, war is war. It's a fight between two countries. What's happening here? Why is he restraining himself so much? Is it the Slav thing? Is it that he knows if he goes all out, he may have challenges with China, with India, and other of his supporters? What is it? What is stopping Putin from going all out and hitting Ukraine the way everybody thinks he should?
Well, my feeling would be that it's rather of domestic origin. Something wrong with decision-making process at the very top. Because this, in Ukraine, you're absolutely correct. The whole nation is homogeneous. There is a joint front against Russian aggression. There is no doubt about that. That's why the decision making process is very fast and efficient. Uh, but in Russia, well, there are people who are not that much positive or supporting the hostilities because they still think that while Ukraine, it's our brother country, we live there next to each other for so many centuries, it's a wrong thing to do on Ukraine. And even now, some people say that. Of course, the better part of them are now out of Russia, living in different countries, but others still stay in Moscow. And I've got an impression that because the military operation is not as successful as it had been expected in February 22, when the whole thing started, there are more and more people among the Russian elite who are quite unhappy and getting more unhappy with what's going on. And of course, it's the Russian rich man who lost a lot of money because of sanctions against them imposed by the United West. And there are also others who are one way or another related to the government. So they are getting tired of this lack of progress because, okay, even if they were positive that, okay, let's do that, let's attack Ukraine, the better part of them expected that it would be quite fast. It would be something at least like in Georgia in a week, Ukraine would be ours. And it did not happen. And now it looks that nobody knows when it would happen. And of course, it creates a lot of discontent and unhappiness among the Russian people. So, taking straightforward decisions like let's hit Kiev by nuclear weapon, for instance, it bears a lot of international repercussions for Russia. So
Mm.
I think that the Russian leadership will never go for that. Making a decisive blow on Kiev, it's another thing that is prone with severe repercussions. Nobody knows what will happen, how the West would react. I think these are the major restraints that keep Putin and his close circle from taking decisive decisions.
That's insightful because at the end of it, I think he's played a very light hand in Ukraine and you know, light touch. Okay, fair enough. Hit, relax, relax, no problem, relax. And that's a very interesting way of fight a war, and that's I think one of the reasons he called it a special military operation and not a war, because it's not one. Now let's kind of get into Ukraine itself. You told this amazing story of this lady who kind of went off and create had a lot of trouble. It's the people in Ukraine, and I've been seeing that there is a certain generation, which is a younger generation in Ukraine, is slow and steady becoming disenchanted and disconnected with this war. The kind of restaurants which are on, bars, pubs. Now, I have nothing against restaurants, bars, pubs. Please do whatever you feel like. But when one saw that, and when one sees what's happening in let's say a place like Bakhmut, where they're losing 2, 3, 400 people a day, it doesn't make sense. I mean, so how are people justifying? How are people in Kiev, the so-called powerful elite of Ukraine, justifying the killing of their own soldiers in the Donbass for them to stand and have a party at a discotheque or something like that?
Well, honestly, whomever I try to talk about this war in Ukraine would rather keep his mouth shut and
Yeah, they don't talk.
prefers to talk on other topic, neutral, so to say. Uh, and the most that I could get from people is, oh, we've got used to this kind of atmosphere. Well, sometimes shelling in Kiev happens, and you don't go to the basement in your house, and people say, look, to run away from the bombs, from shells, one has to live continuously in the basement, and it's not feasible because running up and down in your apartment block, it's not normal. It runs you crazy. So people say, well, we hope that we won't be hurt. That's the way they live. They got used to it. You know that many foreign embassies who initially fled from Kiev to Lviv in western Ukraine, now they're back. They're functioning in a normal regime. So life is more or less back to normal. Of course, well, you can buy everything if you go shopping. There is no shortage of anything. Of course, prices are up, substantially up, but at least people go to work, people go shopping, and as you mentioned yourself, they wine and dine at bars and restaurants. They got used to that kind of atmosphere, which is not normal. I agree totally with you.
How do you justify that? I mean, somebody from somebody's family is going to die, and you're in a discotheque. But that also brings me to a very interesting aspect of it. I guess the Ukrainians are in that place today where they are able to cut the war away from them is because they're not paying for it. Uh,
I don't know.
Money,
I think people
money brings in a lot of connectivity, when it goes out of your pocket.
maybe maybe it's one of the reasons, but I think it's more related to the general so-called censorship because you nobody dares to say the negative things about the war in the open. It's strictly forbidden. You
Are
never
you
know
trying
what
to tell me?
people.
I'm sorry. Are you trying to tell me the average restaurant goer in Kiev does not know what's happening in Bakhmut to his people?
It's a kind of trend to distance themselves from that other life on the front. They live in a parallel world, I would say this. I don't
It's
have any other explanation. I have a gut feeling that some people they could voice some criticism, but they won't dare because they're afraid of some kind of repercussions that they could be detained by law enforcement authorities, they could lose their jobs or whatever. That's why, at face value, the atmosphere is everybody goes to work, everybody goes to a restaurant if he wants, life goes the way it should go.
India has a neighbor called Pakistan,
Yeah.
currently going through a lot of turmoil. They are trying to arrest their own former
Oh,
prime
yeah.
minister. The army has a lot of issues and stuff. Here is a country that has lived on grants, and it's gone to the IMF 22 times. It has never earned anything on its own. Today, it's selling weapons to Ukraine, buying Russian oil, trying to buy Russian oil,
Yeah, trying.
trying. How much of it will come, I don't know. But the factor that why I brought Pakistan up is very, very simple. Is the factor that Pakistan is a country which is like this. It's disassociated with reality, and I see the same traits coming into Ukraine, that people are so disconnected with what's happening. I think all of them sit down in the evening and do their beads to Zelensky. It's seeming like that everything that he's saying is a gospel truth. It's so funny. Why haven't the people started talking about the dead bodies that are coming home?
Well,
The
I'm afraid,
mothers, the sisters, you know.
Adi, I'm afraid that there is a very strong government control over the public opinion in Ukraine, that there is a so called watch going on over what people think, what people say, what people do. So it affects you. We still remember the Soviet times, in particular those under Stalin regime, when people were simply afraid to open their mouth and to say something on their mind if this something was against Stalin, or at least critical to what Stalin been doing. It's a similar tendency prevailing in Ukraine these days. Otherwise, I don't have any explanation because I agree with you. It's simply not humane not to say in the open about what happened to brothers, sisters, husbands, relatives, friends, whomsoever who perished at the front because
Yeah,
casualties are very heavy.
I mean, you can say, oh, they're involved in a special operation, so they can't speak to their mothers and stuff like that. Okay, they've been involved for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. Where is this guy? And that's something that surprises me. I don't see a rally of mothers. I don't see a rally of sisters, wives whose husbands have just gone and not come back. Uh, he's just okay. It's fine. I mean, Zelensky is there who'll take care, and it's amazing. Uh, Russia, fair enough. I can understand he's gone in with a lighter touch. He didn't want to lose too many soldiers. Understood. He doesn't want to do that. It's a fair thing. It may be wrong in military, but humanely, it's fair. I can understand that. Coming back to Putin, he is in a place today where he has all the cards for him. I mean, whatever he's done in the past 1.5 years, Ukraine is at his weakest, NATO is at his weakest, the economies of the West are tumbling. He's got firm stance with China. He's got a good buyer in India and many other countries. As a matter of fact, Ukraine, EU is buying oil from India that we process from Russia. So he's
Oh,
got that. Yeah, I mean, can you imagine that, by the way? We buy a
no.
lot of oil from Russia, we
Yes.
process it,
Yep.
and we sell it back to Europe.
Interesting.
Good for us. We're making money.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's fine. Continue. I have no problems. But, anyways, he's got his cards in his deck. Where does Putin see himself going in the next 3 to 6 months? Does he look at finishing this war? What does he do?
There is a persistent talk about some kind of peaceful settlement. You remember when Chairman Xi came to Moscow, they vaguely mentioned the so called framework Chinese peace proposal, but nothing too much happened after that. Now there is a new scenario on agenda that the president of Southern Africa is preparing some kind of peaceful plan to be brought to attention of Putin and Zelensky. And there are some rumors that Zelensky has mentioned some kind of positive attitude towards looking into these peace proposals. So I suspect that for Putin, the best resolution would be to come to some kind of peace settlement. At least this is what Russia has been voicing out since the beginning of the military operation. But of course, the terms for peace settlement are important. And as we all know, that's the main stumbling block because Ukraine wants Russia to go back and to stay within the borders established in 1991 to restore the Ukrainian sovereignty over Donbass and maybe over Crimea, while the Russians say no way, Crimea is Russian. So there is hardly any potential to start peace negotiations when the opposing party are so far away from each other. Still, for the last couple of weeks, they've been talking intensely about the so called South African proposal. So I don't know what's inside, and nobody knows as of now, I believe. But at least this is what, by face value, Putin and his close circle are promoting these days. We're for peace settlement. Most probably, if the terms of this agreement are suitable, they would be ready to stop the war and to proceed with peace negotiations. But the most important is to find the so called compromise solution,
Hmm.
which I'm afraid is next to impossible. So, by the military hostilities, if you look at them, there is hardly much progress achieved at the fronts. Some people say that it's because of the Russian army is mismanaged. It's because they're suffering from some kind of internal frictions. But others say that they don't want to proceed that much. They just want to keep Donbass under control. They are not planning to go as far as Odessa. They are not after seizing Kherson or Nikolaev and further Odessa in order to establish a so called corridor to Moldova, to Pre-Dniester region, because that was the initial plan at the very beginning of hostilities. But it's all hearsay because the Kremlin keeps its mouth shut, just saying that we're for peace, we're for peace settlement.
You mentioned something really, really amazing, and that's why I was smiling during your answer. The Russians don't say anything, but they've done some stuff which tells you where the war is going. They recently blew up a bridge between Ukraine and Romania, right down next to Odessa. That cuts off Romania and the troops which are there, the NATO troops within Romania, for an entry into that little part of land next to Odessa into Ukraine. That's one. And the second thing, it's very amazing that you actually said that things have not moved up, and there's this whole Wagner Prigozhin running around and saying Gerasimov. I really love that. It's amazing, but I
Yeah,
don't believe a word of it. The reason is because somewhere down the line, I feel that the Russians are playing a game. They're wanting the Ukrainians to come back into Bakhmut. Oh, the Russians are weak. Let's go in. And they did. They did try it. As a matter of fact, the Ukrainians went in, tried to probe, and got whacked back. All this seems to be a very, very interesting and very, very nicely timed affair by Russia. I think for the first time they're playing their, this is just my opinion, information warfare card properly. How do you think that? I mean, this all could be a complete farce.
you know what? I take it more seriously. I'm afraid, and I feel sad about that. That Prigozhin and his Wagner Group are the best military result generating Russian army. Well, it's not Russian army, at least Russian military formation, because they are not a part of the Russian army. They're independent, so to say, but they make a lot of progress, and it generates a lot of jealousy among the
Exactly.
Russian military elite, in particular in the Ministry of Defense. And fighting goes on. There are, I believe, some people who want Prigozhin to be out, but Prigozhin, he is great at PR. He is a charismatic person, and
Yeah.
his video on Telegram, it's like a movie. The things
He, did,
he is saying, the
he didn't
way
become a
he is
billionaire like
saying,
that. He
yeah,
didn't become a
uh,
billionaire like that. I mean,
yeah, it's difficult to believe. But on the other hand, from time to time, I listen to Kadyrov. And
yeah.
Kadyrov is also, Kadyrov, he plays his own game. He's in the middle because he's one of Putin's favorites. So he tries to cool down Prigozhin, at least Prigozhin's rhetoric against Gerasimov and Shoigu and the Ministry of Defense. But I was laughing myself the other day because I was listening to one of his videos when Kadyrov was saying, Prigozhin, cool down. You're in desperate need of munition. But nothing goes fast this way. When we were taking Mariupol, the Kadyrov forces, we also wait for munition for several days, and I have to ask for munition supply several times. And I asked for detachment of armor, and I asked for 5 tanks to be assigned to us for our storming brigade. But instead of 5 tanks, I got only one. But when this one arrived, its crew ran away, and we had to bring them back and to put inside the tank and push them to the battlefield. Look, it's like a comedy. It's not a military warfare. So I don't know how to call it, but it's really sounds strange.
The funny thing is, the funniest thing of this entire thing is that he comes out and says what he says, this and that and the other. Oh, killing this, killing that, and all that. Nobody in Russia has come out and said one little thing. The entire Ukrainian war effort is being countered by Wagner. Wagner's what? A private military contractor, militia, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, yeah.
30, 40,000 soldiers are holding the entire Ukrainian army to ransom. I think it works for the Russians. If I was a Russian general, I'll say keep it up, continue fighting, because my forces are intact. I mean,
Well,
if I
that
need to fight NATO after that, I need my forces to be ready. This all you can do. Kadyrov, you do. Prigozhin, you do it. I don't. Okay,
Well,
that's what.
it's exactly what Prigozhin is saying. He said he keeps demanding munition because he claims they're completely short of munition. That's why his casualties are so heavy. Because his group, they are the storming fighters. So they definitely rely on artillery and armor
Yeah,
support
yeah, yeah,
heavily. So if he does not receive or no artillery or armor detachments are assigned to him, he can't succeed. This is just logical. And he says, look, if I were the top military command, I would have given Prigozhin all the munition he needs in order to push him into moving. But you're doing quite the opposite. You're killing the Wagner Group by not giving munition and support on the flanks on Bakhmut, because nowadays, yeah, on one hand, Prigozhin troops are moving forward, but behind them, the Russian regulars on the flanks, they are not doing it at all. They are retreating and they are losing the ground gained by Prigozhin guys a couple of months ago. This is what's been happening, and this is just ridiculous. So anyway, it's a very strange war. That's
yeah. It's a very
the
strange
thing.
situation. I mean, you don't know what the plan is. What we are analyzing is tactical movements. What is the strategic game? Are the Russians moving back to edge a little bit, straighten up? There's a lot of what's known as streamlining operations where you try and make your line straight so that you're able to face if there's a counter attack. So you sometimes come back, sometimes move a little forward. There's a lot of things that happen, but it's really funny. And I saw that video and I was like, okay, this is interesting. This is really interesting. And the West seems to have lapped it up, and the New York Times and the Washington Post are writing articles about it. And there's nothing in Russia. Everybody's quiet. Everything is okay. The next day he comes out and gives a this thing. No, no, I never said we are withdrawing from Ukraine, from Bakhmut. We will capture it. There are only 20, 30 buildings left. We will take it. Don't worry. What happened in one night? You know what? So it's a very, very confused sort of a situation. You're absolutely right, Maria, and I really appreciate the candor in which that you've broken this down. We can only analyze what's happening. We can only comment on
Yeah,
it, but the reality is something which is far away from us. It's very, very amazing. And I mean, from what I've learned about President Putin, he does not speak. He does not put his cards out, and he keeps doing these little. In Hindi, there's a word called tamasha. That means it's a drama.
yeah,
So I'll call it a typical tamasha, a typical drama to keep the world engaged and hide the real thing. I don't know what that is, but in any case, thanks so much, Maria, for joining us. I know you're in Turkey, and President Erdogan is supposed to be recrowning himself shortly.
yeah.
So that's going to be interesting to watch. There's going to be a lot of geopolitics around it as well. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you and learning from you. Till next time, Jai Hind.
Thank you, Audi. It's always a pleasure talking to you. All the best to you too.
Thank you.